Hello class. Today we are going to go over chapter 1 of your textbook, and we're going to review the PowerPoint, which has a lot of good information, but it does not contain everything. So you have to ensure that you do read the chapter. So again, we're just going to review the PowerPoint. There's a lot of good points we'll talk about. And again, if you have any questions, just let me know, okay? Again, this is your first chapter, and basically it talks about what is criminal justice, and it talks about what the book is going to entail as far as these chapters, okay? So, we shall start. For your introduction here, basically the American criminal justice system looks at fairness, at procedural fairness. And there's a lot of different ways that that occurs, which we'll talk about throughout this class. And basically there's the public that has to do with the criminal justice system, as well as laws and police. So cooperation through all of these agencies, people, and laws must take place in order for the system to work. So it has to be consensual, has to be agreed upon. So looking at a brief history of crime in the United States, the book does a good job talking about this, so we're just going to go over this briefly. Obviously, crime control has been a primary concern of politicians, government, and laws, and what's going on or what has gone on lately with protesting and other things, you can see that crime control often takes different turns because of what is happening within our states. Basically, what has happened over the last 50 years or so has helped create the modern criminal justice system. A lot of things have taken place in the last 50 years that have helped crime control, the way we go about police work, investigation, etc., etc. We'll talk about some of those things. And we'll look at some, not necessarily crime ways, but how crime affects our communities and how they have gone up and down throughout our history. Okay, so first of all, and again, the book does a good job talking about this, about the history of crime. Between 1850 and 1880, crime was basically rampant because of immigration and civil war that plagued our country for many years. Not that immigrants were bad, just that we were a new country trying to get our laws established, and there was not enough police, not enough laws, so there was an epidemic of crime that occurred for about 30 years-ish per the book. As opposed to the early 20th century that came across, there was widespread organized criminal activity. And we're talking about organized crime like Al Capone, people running drugs and alcohol, basically criminal gangs. And a lot of that was associated with prohibition. And prohibition was the banning of production, importation, transportation, and sales of alcohol. Imagine that. So prohibition started in 1920 and lasted till 1933. So that's why there's a lot of organized criminal activity that produced alcohol, sold alcohol, and transported alcohol. So imagine 13 years without alcohol. So back then, big deal, and that's why there's a lot of crime associated with prohibition. And police officers that were not doing their jobs on the take, receiving money under the table to look the other way when it came to prohibition sales. 1940s and 1960s, crime rates remained stable after World War II. So again, the United States basically won a war, and people were happy, and people were working, factories were open, and crime rates did not really go up. So they were pretty stable, okay, for a while. Though the 60s and 70s, a lot of stuff happened. Civil rights movement was going on, feminism was going on. So the increase of all of this led to individual rights and not necessarily police justice. So individual rights were emphasized in the 60s and 70s. And there was a dramatic increase in reported crime. So people now were okay to report crime. They weren't afraid of the police. They wanted justice. So what they did was they reported crime at a higher rate. And due to the fact that most people then had telephones, and that's how most crimes were reported. Moving up to the 1980s, war on drugs emerged, and the emergence of crack cocaine. And there's two different versions of how it got its name. Some people say that it got its name because it cracks when you smoke it, and other people say that it basically cracks when you handle it. Either way, it's a very, very powerful drug. We'll go over some of this in a different chapter that we have coming up, chapter 16. If you have some time, I would highly suggest you watch the movie New Jack City from the 90s. It's an outstanding movie about the emergence of crack cocaine in the East Coast. So again, if you get a chance, watch that movie. It's available online, and again, it's a very interesting movie, very powerful movie about crack cocaine and what it does to people. Okay, moving on to the 1990s. Increasing crime was going on, and the biggest things in the 90s, per the book, was the Oklahoma City bombing in 1995 and the 1999 Columbine High School massacre. If you don't know or have not heard about these two things that occurred, 1995, 1999, you may want to look them up. They were very powerful to the nation, and they changed a lot of laws and the perception of people and the perception of police and what can be done. And finally, September 11, 2001, hopefully you know about that. If not, you need to research that about what happened. And after 9/11, September 11, 2001, law enforcement basically changed the way they supervise our citizens. And it involves global efforts, and it involves a lot of different agencies now, federal, state, local, as far as terrorism goes. So September 11, 2001 changed the way we do business in the United States, and it's still changing. Early 2000s, there was an increase in corporate or white-collar crime, and again, we'll go over that in a little bit, and which increased federal incarceration rates slightly because of white-collar crime. White-collar crime is usually a federal crime, occurs across state lines or internationally. It's money laundering, things like that, and it's a federal offense, so people go to federal prison because of that. Our current era, though, right now, depending on stats you look at per the book, there's a declining rate of traditional crime, and we'll talk about those types. And part of it is due to technology-based evidence that is collected. But again, when you have that, there's a lot of technology-based crime. So there's a lot of people that are doing crimes over the internet, scamming people because of technology. And of course, right now has been how it's been the last few months due to COVID-19, protesting, due to police activities. So there's a lot of unrest right now that we're trying to settle. And again, it's a very fluid environment. So these things will change. It's very circular. Something happens, there's a response, and then it may happen again, another response. So it's very, very circular so far. So the theme of the book, as I mentioned before, is basically individual rights versus public order. And you as a person need to figure out what's more important to you. Are your rights more important than public order? Do you care if some of your rights, your personal rights, are taken away in order to preserve public order? Do you think that protesters can have masks on? Is that an individual right? Or is that something that public order does not allow? In Sacramento, California, it is illegal for protesters to wear a mask. Some people say that's a right that I have, and it's being trampled upon because of the public order perspective. So again, when we talk about individual rights versus public order, that's kind of the theme of the book. So that's the balanced approach. And we'll be talking about this through the entire semester, about the balance of individual rights and public order. So again, you got to figure out where you're at. After 9/11, there's a lot of individual rights that were taken away. Surveillance, telephone wiretaps, internet searches, because of what happened. So a lot of people said, you know what, you can go ahead and take those individual rights away from me, but as long as it's going to preserve public order and catch people that are doing the wrong thing, I'm okay with it. But other people did not agree with that. So again, these are constantly in battle with each other. Okay, so we have to look at which one we want to have most of. Hopefully there's a balance there. So the interests of society should take precedence over individual rights, like wearing a mask at COVID-19. Okay, is it better for society or is it better for the individual? Again, different rights, different perspectives. Okay, we're going to talk about justice, the word justice, and it's going to have several meanings here. First of all, justice means fairness. When you exact justice on somebody, or people say they want justice, they may not know it means, per the book, fairness. When people say their brother was killed, they want justice, maybe justice means that they want that person that killed their brother to be killed. But per the book and per our conversation here, justice means fairness. Now, social justice is a little different. And again, it talks about, or it discusses, the theme is that it's all civilized life. Social justice, it's linked to everybody and is linked to a culture, not about right or wrong. So it's fairness to all people. Social justice. Can we have social justice? Can we include all aspects of life, all people, as far as social justice? Different people want different social justice. Next, we have civil justice. And again, it's a component of social justice. Relationships that are fair between citizens, government agencies, and businesses in private matters. That's why we have civil courts, because people can sue each other civilly for monetary value. So we'll talk more about civil justice when we come up with Chapter 4, Criminal Law. It's just another type of justice. Criminal justice, as we know, it concerns the aspects of violating the criminal law, and again, the process that goes along with criminal justice. Crimes committed, persons innocent until proven guilty, they're afforded bail, afforded rights, go to trial before a judge, sentencing, etc. We'll talk about that in just a second. So criminal justice is just everything concerning violations of criminal law. Consensus model, two models we're going to look at. First of all, consensus means together, agreeing. So they all have to work together. Law enforcement, courts, corrections all must work together and be cooperative to have a smooth running system. So when the book talks about the consensus model, the assumption is that everybody works together to achieve justice. But as we know, some police officers don't arrest when they should. Others compensate. They use too much force. Same with corrections. The DA may not want to charge somebody because of political pressure. So the assumption is that all these models work together. Law enforcement, courts, and corrections. Not always true, though. The conflict model assumes that it is a non-system and it's a product of conflict and not cooperation. So the police have a job to do. They're in conflict with the DA because they may arrest somebody. The DA may not pick up the charge. The person goes free. With corrections, a person gets out on probation early and they have not learned their lesson. They commit more crimes. They go back in the system. So there's conflict. And again, you need to decide what type of model we have, whether it's conflict or consensus. Usually it's consensus, but there's always some conflict that goes along. Okay, you can read this, the core components and their what they do, their functions. We've kind of already gone over this a little bit, but you can read this about what police do, correctional agencies, and the courts. Again, police, courts, corrections. Law enforcement, courts, corrections. That's the three basic components of our system. Okay, so we've already gone over this with the criminal justice process the other day, but just real basically, we're going to go over it one more time for you. So again, a crime starts a criminal justice process, then comes the investigation, hopefully an arrest. That is the act of taking a person into custody and stopping their movement. Miranda versus Arizona came out in 1966, and you've hopefully all heard the Miranda warning on TV or in movies. You have the right to remain silent. What's interesting about Miranda is that Miranda is only used when you're going to question somebody about a crime. So that's why when a person's arrested, they get back in the police car, they're in handcuffs, and the officer doesn't ask any questions. Maybe they're driving to the jail to be booked in, and the person just starts talking and talking and talking and talking. They've not been Mirandized, but yet they keep talking. So anything they say can be used against them because they have not been Mirandized. So only when they've been Mirandized and they're asked questions, then they can stop at any time. So that's kind of important. We talked about the booking process, the administrative process in the jail. First appearance, there's opportunity for bail. We talked about the preliminary hearing. We didn't talk about the information or indictment, but we talked about the arraignment where a plea is entered officially. Adjudication, again, they have a right to a jury trial per the Sixth Amendment. Most cases are dealt with through plea bargaining, not trial. And we'll go over that in a little bit. And we're going to talk about procedural law in Chapter 4. And again, a defendant may waive a right to jury and be tried by a judge. We talked about that, bench trial. Sentencing may involve probation, fine, prison, term, or a combination. A pre-sentence report or a PSI, pre-sentence investigation report, helps a judge make an appropriate sentencing decision. We'll talk about PSIs coming up in our Chapter 12. Convictions can be consecutive or concurrent. A consecutive conviction is if you get 6 years. Consecutive means you have to serve 1 year after the other consecutively. Concurrent sentence is if you get 6 years and for one crime and convicted of 4 years in another crime. If you get concurrent sentences, you serve the time at the same time. You serve your 6 and 4 years at the same time. So consecutive terms are much longer, concurrent terms are much less. And of course, all convictions may be appealed unless you enter into a plea bargain. Talked about corrections a little bit. We'll talk more about that after sentencing. It could be jail, it could be probation, it could be parole. A lot of prisons and jails have some sort of treatment facility or programs, but many are underfunded and overcrowded. So there's a lack of these programs. We'll talk more about that. Reentry is probation or parole, and usually it involves community service activities. In California, people after they serve prison time are supervised by a parole agent, but the book talks about parole officer, one and the same. Due process, talked about that. Need procedural fairness required by the Constitution. Individual rights of criminal defendants are recognized, and violations may lead to dismissal of evidence or criminal charges. We'll talk more about that, like fruits of the poisonous tree, when we come to Chapter 4, Criminal Law. And the Bill of Rights, and specifically your amendments, you should know your First, Second, Fourth, Fifth, Sixth, Eighth, and 14th Amendments. Some are written here, but you should know your amendments in this class, and we'll talk about those. They're very important. The role of the court, basically the court interprets rights. The judge does that. So when a judge makes a decision, hopefully it is per the law. Depending on which court it is, it can go all the way up to the United States Supreme Court and change laws. And again, we'll talk about how laws are changed and present decisions are made coming in an upcoming class. Okay, we talked about the two model system, crime control and due process model, individual rights, etc., etc. Again, that's the theme of the book here. Okay, almost done here. You're going to hear the word evidence-based practices a lot. And basically, they're looking at programs that have been scientifically tested and based on social science research. Not just someone say this is a good program, but it's scientifically researched that it will work. Evidence-based practices, and again, we'll talk more about that in a little bit. Okay, start of academic criminal justice. August Vollmer, Berkeley, California, police chief, first one. He began a lot of good things for criminal justice, started having courses in colleges. Okay, so that was the first time that was done, 1920, a long time ago. And he thought that early education of criminal justice for professionals was imperative, that you have to have that. During the 60s and 70s, this is when criminology was introduced for education. And this is when the National Institute of Justice came into being and supported research into the criminal justice field. That's why we have a lot of these classes that have been approved by NIJ. Switching out to multiculturalism, what that means. It means different things to different people per the book. It basically means a society that has different races, cultures, and behaviors and characteristics. Not one is correct, but together as a melting pot, as we are in the United States, we come together and we are multicultural. And you'll hear this again, we'll talk more about that. Social diversity, again, differences between individuals and groups in the same society. Everybody's different, everybody has their own group, religion, characteristics, ethnicity, race, and there's differences. And again, trying to get along sometimes can be difficult because of the social diversity that we have. The bottom line here, the book talks about, is if you work in the criminal justice system, you must have a significant level of cultural competence. So you must be very objective. You cannot be subjective if you're a police officer, if you're a prosecutor, if you're a correctional officer, because you can't have any bias. You have to treat everybody the same. Sometimes that's different. And we'll talk more about that as we go on. Okay, that's chapter 1. And again, make sure you read the chapter. This is just the PowerPoint, the highlights. And as we go on, this is how we're going to be conducting our classes. And if you have any questions, let me know, or else you can put it into the online, into our, what's it called? Discussion board. And again, it's been a long week here so far. Good week. Have some good information. Hopefully everybody's feeling comfortable. If you are not, let me know. And if we are, we're going to press on. So thank you very much.